With the gaming stuff, there's a lot of influences from actual games. Like I remember listening to it and being like, Stardew Valley, you have to have played it.
Mhm.
What a sensational game. Like seeing sort of like that Harvest Moon influence and talking about these games. I think there was games from sort of like the late 90s and I saw it as a checklist and I'm like, played it, played it, played it, not yet played it. And then at the end, there was like another list of games. And for me, I was like, yes, I
Mhm.
played all these. Like, this is great. How was it to create your very own game from scratch?
Yeah, in terms of the references in the book, I think a lot of us who are gamers, like, because we don't like necessarily play with any ulterior motive. You don't play a game because you think like that'll be really useful for me to include it in a book later. I
Yeah.
never like stuff, I never played a game thinking to myself, boy, I hope I've played in a rounded way so that when I go and depict, game designers through their lives, I'll be able to like really hit the key moments. But I did find when I started researching the book about 5 years ago that it required me to play beyond what I would naturally just play on my own. So I had never really played Metal Gear Solid, or
Nope.
some of these like big classic titles. And so I had to kind of like go into them and really play them and think about them. And sometimes you can't even play the version that existed because it's tied to like a particular console or particular port. So you're playing some version of it, but not necessarily the one that they would have played. And so
Mm.
I did kind of deep dive into like the history of games beyond what I had naturally gravitated toward. And like when you talk to like people that are game journalists or what have you, they talk about that, how everybody has their own like sort of gaming life that isn't necessarily the same because you might have one kind of computer, or maybe you played everything on PlayStation, or maybe you played everything like, on Nintendo and you never played anything else. So I had to fill that in. But to kind of come up with my own games, it was a combination of thinking about like what I thought were like the creative cutting edge of games, and sometimes even like beyond what would make sense for the year because I wanted them to be slightly ahead of things.
Mm.
So like, but early in the book, like a game like Solution, the game that Sadie makes for her class, that was thinking about what would a clever college girl be able to come up with relatively quickly given the tech for that time. And that was always a thing that dictated the games they made. Like what was the tech doing? And I also spent a lot of time just looking at like, what were the best selling games of those years.
Mm.
And so it was this kind of combination of things. But in the end, what the games really are, they're kind of just like your first question. They're the novels they write. And so
Mm.
they're the things that reflect their life experiences, where they are in time, and their conflicts, and they become art.
What games are you a big fan of?
Like historically or currently.
Both. I
Like,
Zelda was the game that made me a
oh, of
gamer.
course. I mean,
Yeah.
I love Zelda,
Yeah.
and I'm excited for the next Zelda. And, I have a thing like I really like the fact that like Zelda like sleeps sometimes, like that Zelda at rest
Mm.
is kind of a thing. But that's a whole other point. Like the first games I really played were probably ones that came preloaded on like a computer that my dad brought home from work. And I remember thinking, hey, these games are solving a really like particular problem for me, which is the problem of, solitude. It's like
Mm.
an only child, and it really gave me like an instant sort of like digital friend.
Yeah.
So I have an attachment to those early games, which are like the earliest games. So like there's like this game called Alley Cat, which is
I remember
like
Alley Cat.
oh,
It was
okay, well, good, somebody remembers Alley Cat.
it was like those, it's like that, pink and blue and like those
Yes,
really
yes.
jarring palette that was
By
like
the way, unless your computer graphic card wasn't working right, and then it was kind of green and red, but it was
yes.
supposed to be like pink and blue. Yeah,
Was that the ones?
it's
Is that
exactly
it?
that.
Oh my
Yeah.
god! It's like,
There's a row of like trash cans, and you're
yep.
this cat, and the cat's got to jump onto the cat, right? And then
Mhm.
there's a series of windows which each represent a little world. And I think that's what I loved about that game, that there was like all these little like, basically mini games, these
Yep.
little worlds within this game. And so, that was like my favorite when I was a little kid. But as I got older, the games I loved were the games by Sierra. And I've talked to other people that are like
Mm.
about my age, and a lot of us played those games. They were
Leisure
these
Suit
sort of
Larry
like,
2. I was
yeah, like
7 years
Leisure Suit
old.
Larry 2. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, totally. Leisure Suit Larry 3, you inhabit two different points of view, and like you are actually this other character like Patty for a while too. And obviously those games are like really kind of disgusting on the like, I don't know, misogyny and like the way they view women level. But as a
Awful.
little kid, I was like, these are very cool games.
Yes.
But my favorite was King's Quest 4, and that was the first one that had like a female protagonist in it. Felt like you had to know things about literature to solve the problems of the game. Like
Mm.
don't go open Pandora's box. This is what happens when you end up in a whale,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So that kind of thing. And so I loved those games. And then I think for a while I just would play whatever was on, just like on somebody's computer in like a pretty like again haphazard way, until I got to my like maybe like age 19, my dad, because he was like a computer snob, was like, you can't own a console. So anytime I wanted to play like Mario or something, I was doing it at a friend's house. But when I was 19, I was like, I have my own money, I'm buying a console, you know?
What
So
was
my
that
first
one?
one was it was an N64, which
Yes.
was a
Okay.
good console.
Honestly, I think
Uh,
it's I could argue it's the best console of all time.
I feel like the best, like this is a serious discussion, but I
Yeah.
feel like the best console of all time is probably the original like Wii, you know? Just because
Revolutionary for what it did to gaming.
right, and I loved it, like, because you could stand up, you could play. It's more social, which I think is cool. I think that's the ethos of Nintendo in a certain way. You
Yes.
know, you can stand up, and then it's funny because then when you go, like, obviously there's different iterations, Wii U, which everybody hated, the Switch, but the Switch everybody loves, and I think that's because it allows us to be bipolar in a way between, like, being, like, completely, like, insular and completely, like,
Mhm.
outward facing, and
Mm.
playing with other people, so I think that's, like, the coolest thing about it. But the Wii is so social and so, like, again, groundbreaking, and I loved that one. So yeah, that's a sense of the games I loved. Like as an adult, it's almost like a cliche to say it this week because of the show, but like probably the game I loved the most that was like a big sweeping game was The Last of Us.
Yeah,
So
it's like the clickers. I'm not great with stealth, especially when something's coming for
no, me
me. I'm like,
neither.
I'm just want to shoot its head off. Let me do that, And they're like, you're dead.
I would love to like never like kind of I'm not great with killing or stealth. Like personally, I would prefer to play things that don't, but the kind of like the poetic like grandeur of it, moves me. The idea that you could like, that it's this kind of poetic retelling of like America.
Mm.
And at the point at which I discovered that he was making kind of a wordplay, like the last of the US. I was like I was down with Druckmann at that point. So
Well, you blew my mind just now.
well, I feel like it's I can't confirm that that's true, but I definitely I think it's true. I think it is true. So, but I love the fact that again that a game about basically a subject that I don't have much interest in, which is like I guess we'll call them zombies. We know it's like cordyceps and the fungus and all that,
That's
but
it.
like
Yeah.
anyway, like we'll call it zombies for shorthand. Like that does not interest me. It's as complicated as like Dostoevsky or something. That
Mm.
interests me. So yeah, that's a game I loved. As an adult player and made me think, hey, games can be really like rich and complicated. But yeah, I play a lot of everything. Like sometimes I just want to play absolute, like I feel bad saying it, absolute garbage. Like, like
And let
that.
me
It's
tell you
not
the
like
game that I believe is
right.
absolute garbage, but
I
loved.
mean, I just mean I'm not going to do that, but I will say that like games, like I think, and I talk about this, the prejudice against sort of like casual games,
Yeah.
and over 50% of gamers are women,
Yep.
and a lot of them are playing casual games, and I think we kind of discount that, but sometimes that's what I want to play. Give me a game that's about like, running a cruise ship
Oh,
or or something like that, or a game like there's a game that I played that is not absolute garbage, but that was about like a woman in like Japan in the like 1980s and 70s running a small diner, and it's called Hungry Hearts, and so the only way you're going to like solve the game is by figuring out the dishes that will like fill the needs of your customers, that kind of thing. So you spend a lot of time just like serving sushi and things like
and
that.
it's also like
Or
time management as well in a way. And
yeah, I think
yeah,
time management, I like the feeling like of doing jobs that seem less difficult and expansive than the job that I actually do.
yeah,
Like where I'm like, I'm really like, I'm running the hell out of this
that's
diner.
it. You're like,
you know,
I'm a 5-star Michelin restaurant. I'm running it like a well-oiled
right.
machine over here.
And like
Yeah.
I could do this. Yeah. There's a fun game that's about like running a game company. And there's actually a couple of those
Game
games that
Dev. I actually started playing it again on my phone because this book inspired it so much. Game Dev
yeah.
Story.
Yeah, game dev story.
Oh
Yeah,
my
totally.
gosh.
Okay, well that company make Kairosoft has a whole series of games that I sometimes will play, and including the game I mentioned about running this small cruise, like I guess it's a cruise ship, but anyway, basically. But I actually love the simplicity of their games. I think they're really beautiful, and they're
Hmm.
like they're just very precise. And so a lot of them are more builder than say game development story, which is like, you keep relentlessly making products and
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. But I can definitely be in the mood for something like that.